Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing all right this evening. This is a rare Sunday show, but there are big events that are going on around the world, and I tend to stay up on big events, especially when it deals in the areas of war and peace, particularly with the United States involved, or potential involvement. First, just as a heads up, I want to thank everyone who helps support the content. You guys, at this point, are the reason this content can keep ticking along. So thank you very much. Beyond that point, I've developed a new feature called Power Chat. Now, Super Chat, for the same thing of Google, would, you could see it in the chat and you could see somebody's announcement. What it would do is anyone that sends a chat through Streamlabs, which is the item below, it's you could say an alternative to Super Chat. I will flash that chat towards the end of the show and maybe in between the show, depending upon where we are within where we're doing with the show, as a screen itself. Power Chat. I'm calling it Power Chat. I love the name. I have a few of these, by the way. These are the items I'm using for the t-shirt auction. The other video explains it. But you send it through Streamlabs. I put it here. Power Chat. So there's that. Now, beyond that, let's get to the show. There are big events that are taking place around the world. There's a small area called Idlib. Right here. I learned a ton the other day. Like, I think it was like 3 in the morning. I'm binge watching. It's one of those things where one item leads to the next. And I'm watching something, I think it's talking about the Middle East, it's talking about Idlib. Great powers uniting or meeting, great. And they said something about Kurds. And I remember hearing this about Kurds more than once. And the thought occurred to me, hey, what do you really know about them? What do you know about that? What do you really know about that very specific part of this very complex issue? I said, I don't know. And it led into several hours of investigation and research. And my wife wakes up, I think it was like, comes out at like 9 in the morning. I'm like, I've learned so much. I've learned so much. So this is Idlib. It's a little area, a little of nowhere, near Aleppo in Syria. As you know, Syria has been embroiled into a civil/imperial war. And this is the last stand of the terrorists. That little area is the last stand of the terrorists. Based on what the UN is saying, there's 10,000 terrorists who are in that area alone. Russia and Syria is saying there's more. Okay, 10,000, a little bit more. There's a lot of terrorists in that particular part of the world. There are also human beings in that part of the world. Now, let's be very clear. This is a brutal war. It's taken hundreds of thousands of lives. This is the last stand, the last place where these terrorists are held up. Turkey, Russia, and Iran, Rouhani, all met to discuss what was going to take place in Idlib. Let's take a look at this, because this is fascinating as to why. Now, the thing that got me interested and dug me into this hole of insight was, why is Turkey involved in this? Right? Like, I understand Russia and Syria, but why is Turkey involved? Why does Turkey care? And yet Turkey does care. Now, part of the reason Turkey cares is because those people are going to flee into Turkey, meaning the refugees are going to flee into Turkey when Russia and Syria starts bombing. And just so we're clear, they haven't started bombing yet. I mean, they haven't started the conflict, but it's clear they're about to start the conflict. This is preliminary bombing that's been taking place. This is Russia. doing this. So winter's coming, meaning they are going to hit Idlib at some point. They're building up to, and they're hitting it in certain parts now. Where's my map? Where's my map? Where's my map? Where's my map? All right, right here. So Idlib. But there's a different reason Turkey is involved also. It has to do with the Kurds, with this. Let's see. Right here, Kurdistan. The Kurds. There's tension between the United States and Turkey. Now, part of this has to do with this kind of weird geopolitical conflict that's taking place right now. So, Erdogan, just think of it, Iran, well, Erdogan, Putin, and Rouhani, Iran, Syria, and Turkey all met. Now, Turkey wanted them to have some kind of ceasefire, which was nonsense, because this is a war, and this is the last stand of the terrorist stronghold. So the question becomes, what next? Now, look at this. What I'm showing you is what's Kurdistan, which doesn't exist. So why am I showing you a mythical city, Jamal? Jamal, why are you showing us a mythical city? Because even though Kurdistan doesn't exist, Kurds do. Now, Kurds is an ethnic group that spans all of these different countries: Iran, Syria, Turkey. Here's the thing. Before World War I, you had the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire encompassed all of this. All of these places were essentially encompassed by the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire was destroyed, the Sykes-Picot Agreement broke these things up into various areas. So what ended up taking place, whether intentional or not, the Kurds didn't get the homeland that they were supposed to get, meaning they didn't get the area they were supposed to get. And they were made the largest minority all throughout the world. And I'm saying that poorly. What I mean is they're a minority in all of these countries, even though there's so many of them. But because of the way the borders were drawn, when Britain drew the borders up after World War I, you ended up with this massive population that ended up being a minority in all of these different countries. Now, there's a militant wing of the Kurds, PKK, and I think there's another YPG. These guys are Marxists. And they're badass. I have to be honest, they are badass. Now, what I mean by this is Turkey has been brutally assaulting these guys, imprisonment, torture. They've been brutally cracking down, and these guys have been pushing back and trying to defend certain borders. Syria, in this case, has been broken, and there are certain areas that the Kurds have essentially almost autonomous regions that these guys have taken hold. Turkey is against the Kurds because, for all intents and purposes, if the Kurds get what they want, it rips a certain amount of territory from Turkey. This is fascinating politics of what's taking place. This group doesn't necessarily have a homeland per se, even though they've been here for thousands of years. Thanks again, Britain. Thanks again. The United States has been paying people, terrorists, to undermine the Syrian government. By the same token, the United States supports the Kurds. From the standpoint of Turkey, the Kurds are a terrorist organization. Now, this is amazing. But Turkey is the only one that has this point of view. Turkey has this point of view because these people want a certain amount of self-determination that Turkey doesn't want to give them that self-determination. The Kurds that are in this particular bunch, and there's another bunch, another thing. Do you remember the Yazidis? Yazidis, back during Obama, ISIS was trying to climb the mountain in order to murder the Yazidis. A group of the, if I'm not mistaken, the PKK, let's just say the Kurds, went to train them and to give them this kind of active Marxist ideology of organization but also training them in militaristic means in order to be able to protect themselves, essentially arming the community. It is fucking phenomenal. The women, the men, all of them are equal components of their society. So even though you have this Muslim culture, they are, for the most part, men and women equals. I gotta be honest, I like it. I don't know everything about it, so I can't necessarily say, the end all be all, but it is a fascinating dynamic that's taken place in that region of the world. It makes me more adamant about not wanting to be involved. I don't think we add anything positive to the dynamic. This is none of us. And for all intents and purposes, even people who might want Assad to go don't necessarily want the terrorists involved. You need to understand what I'm saying here. It's even people who would recognize Assad as being a bad guy that's involved in the government don't want terrorists taking over their country. The angst is this: Kurdistan. So Turkey views Kurds as terrorists. So Turkey goes on bombing campaigns against the Kurds. The United States supports the Kurds because the Kurds fight ISIS, fights the terrorists. Now, Turkey has allowed terrorists to flow into Syria. It is very clear at this point, and the Kurds have even made this point clear, that Turkey has allowed this because, let's be clear, the terrorists are fighting the Kurds. It's fuckfest. The United States has been supporting terrorists to try to undermine the Syrian government itself. Russia, Iran, has been fighting on the side of Syria in order to push back the terrorists that have been trying to undermine the government. All of this have started to come to a head in Idlib province. It's coming to a head because, as I said, this is the last stronghold. This is the last holdout. This is the last hope of the terrorists. And at this moment, everybody is screaming about chemical weapons. The UN has said that the terrorists and the Syrian government have the potential to release chlorine gas in weaponized form. Nikki Haley has screamed out with her psychic powers that if any chemical weapon strike takes place, it is indeed the Syrian government. Now, understand the entirety of Syria, for all intents and purposes, is under the domain of Bashar al-Assad. He's, for all intents and purposes, one. Russia, Iran, and Syria are going to bash and crush Idlib. There is nothing that the terrorists can do to stop it. What would be their reason for doing that? It just makes no sense. That's all. The only thing that makes sense would be if the terrorists themselves release chemical weapons, in which case you can get the other forces into the conflict. It makes no sense, though, for the stronger power to do such a thing. That is an act of weakness, not an act of strength. And I don't mean weakness as a negative. I just mean weakness from the standpoint of relative strengths. It's coming to a head. This has been a bloody conflict. And we have not been on the side of the angels in this conflict. Look, it's one thing if you don't like a government. That's perfectly fine. But it's not our business to intrude into that process. If the people in that country agitate and change governments, that's on them. It's not on us. My pushback against our position, meaning from the standpoint of the United States on this, is because I don't believe we're on the side of the angels. It is for them to make the determination on what they want that country to be, not for us. The very fact that the people themselves, who are opposition figures to Assad, are also now opposition figures to the people trying to take Assad down, kind of gives you this idea on what the people of Syria themselves want. It's their country, not mine. So I'm going to leave this here. I'm not going to keep this long. Oh, and by the way, just for another thing that came up today. I've said this myself. You've heard me say this. Where's it? Right here. Israel discreetly funded and armed at least 12 rebel groups in southern Syria in order to keep Iranian-backed militias and Islamic fighters away from Israel border. I've said this months ago. I said this months ago. They were funding terrorists in that particular part of the world in order to keep them out of Golan Heights. Yeah. There are a lot of players that are involved in this conflict. I guess that's my main point. And that a lot of this, at least from the standpoint of Turkey and the United States, is in that region of the world, Kurdistan. It's phenomenally fascinating what's taking place there. And by the way, the United States was kept out of that meeting. They tried to, in a real way, in real talk, they tried to take down a government, and they failed to do so. Yeah, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. I mean, you get to take down how many before, yeah. Some hard-right Zionists want to expand into what they call the Greater Israel. The Greater Israel. Abdullah Al-Khan, yeah, that's his name. Leader of the PKK, yes, that's it. Still changing his ideology in prison and convinced the PKK to move towards some kind of anarchist dictatorship of the proletariat. Yeah, Martian Villager. Yeah, I was listening to, these guys are true believers. I mean, and they're protecting their borders. That's what it looks like to me. I don't know the full skinny of it, so I can't necessarily give a full, rundown. But it was fascinating to me. I mean, Turkey is actively going after this group, and this group is only calling for, democracy. We want a representative government. That's what they're effectively calling for. But yeah, they're Marxists. They're Marxists. All right, I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.